Welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast, where your host, Josh Sweeney, will give you, the business leaders, HR professionals, and company culture aficionados, the knowledge you need to take your company culture to the next level.
Welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast. My name is Josh Sweeney, and I'm here with my co-host, Crystal Sweeney.
Hello.
This is Season 3, which is all about retention and company culture. So we have been telling you a little bit about the different generations, and what we wanted to do is bring that together and share how different generations come together and the impact in the work environment and in building company culture. In the last episode, we went a little bit through the education process and how the millennial generation has the ability to move fast, even though most people look at them wanting things tomorrow and moving fast as a negative. And we looked at the positives of that and the reasons for that. Today, we're going to look at and talk about, a little bit about the growth plan and how to leverage the speed at which different generations move and ensure that you're helping them with employee retention and trying to keep people on board. So with that growth plan, one thing that we've seen over time is, most companies just don't have a growth plan. Have you worked at a company with a growth plan?
I have never worked for a company that had a growth plan.
Right. So I've never worked at a company with a growth plan either. Normally, growth plan meant some sort of annual review that had nothing to do with growth or plan. It was exactly what it said. It was an annual review, and you found out what your bump was, and then you went on your merry way for the rest of the year, usually somewhat blindly.
Or maybe the company had a growth plan for you that you were not aware of.
Maybe that's true. You don't even know if it was a good one or in line with what you wanted to do. So that just doesn't fly anymore. Be completely honest with you, not having a growth plan for employees with mainly the end of the Gen X, the millennial, and the beginning of the Gen Z generations, it's just not going to fly. One is if somebody doesn't see a growth plan, they don't know where they're going. They don't know what kind of ride they're on board for. They don't know how they're going to grow professionally and personally. And so the first person that comes to them from another company that says, hey, we're going to challenge you with something else that's fun and enjoyable that you want to do, makes it easier for them to just jump ship and go to another role somewhere else. So what we're really advocating is to come up with a growth plan that really outlines how that person's going to grow, what the timeline is, and what they can do to achieve those goals in the quickest possible way.
Yeah, I think that's really important with especially the speed that the new generations are moving at is, if they don't see a direction or they don't know that there is room to grow, then they're going to jump ship. I mean, they're going to find somewhere else where they can make those leaps and bounds of advancements for themselves. I've had a company where I, was leaving for, whatever reason I was leaving, and it was like, oh, well, we were kind of considering you for a management position. I was like,
that's news to me.
I had no idea. I mean, it was brand new to me, and then it was like, oh man, it didn't change the direction I was heading in, but it would have been nice to know that ahead of time. But yeah, with everybody wanting to move and be a mover and shaker, definitely being able to put that in a roadmap and show them this is where you can be. I think that's important.
Yeah, so some of the things we're seeing and working with clients on and even injecting into our own organization is this concept of a growth plan. So what does a growth plan look like? It's basically sitting down with members of the team, employees in this case, or depending on your position, and understanding where do they want to go both personally and professionally. And building out that plan. Now, personally aligns a lot with professionally in many different ways, so knowing that's going to have an impact. If somebody has very lofty growth goals for themselves personally, then that there's some discussions oftentimes that need to happen, and educational discussions around what that means from a job perspective. An example that I like to share is, I talked to somebody who wanted to get very far in how much they made personally, what was their salary per year. But then when I talked to them about what role they wanted in the organization, they were very incongruent. A lot of people don't have a concept of, well, what does that role pay? What are the demands in that role? How do I get there, right? You can't say, I want to be in a certain marketing role that generally pays $42,000 a year, but I want to make $120 a year, right? They're incongruent. So part of that is having the conversation and just educating people on, what does that look like, right? You have to keep in mind, a lot of employees never were in HR. They don't look at pay bands. They haven't really figured out, what is that going to look like? How's that going to change my life?
Well, I think that's fair. As far as shedding a little bit of light on, hey, if this is the job you want, then this is kind of the pay grade that you'll be at, and that sometimes can have a great impact on, somebody's growth plan. They may decide to change gears and go a completely different direction. And when you're having those conversations, and that's when you get to discover, things like that.
Yeah, I know with all the employees I've had over the years, one of the things I've always said is, it doesn't matter to me if you want to make $10 million a year. I can put a plan together that will get you there. It may or may not be within this organization, but I can tell you what roles and what jobs are going to get you there. And maybe I can lead them down a path and say, maybe you need to go figure out what role and what path gets you to that kind of income or the kind of income that you would like. So my belief system doesn't put any bounds on where people want to go. I think that's another concept that a lot of people may be challenged with, just given their role or their upbringing or their own belief system is within mine. There are no limits. I want to help you get wherever you want to go. It's just more of a conversation of how to get there. Well,
and I think that kind of shows, some of your core values that you have in your organization. I mean, that's a very unselfish way of looking at it. If you care about the people who work for you, and if you guys are able to identify the growth plan, and if it doesn't include necessarily something that they may be able to accomplish within your organization, but you were able to, have a hand in helping them get to where they want to be in life, that's going to stick with them forever, and that's going to speak volumes about your culture and your values.
Yeah, definitely. So, a few things on the growth plan and employee retention is, if you're able to build out this growth plan and show them where they're going to go, what they can achieve, and have these conversations, you're generally going to get a lot more buy-in. Hopefully, if they're following the growth plan and they agree with the plan that you've set out together, then you're going to drive employee retention up. You're going to drive turnover down. There's going to be a lot of benefits. The other thing I like to throw in is, going back to that belief system, is one thing I also recommend is not to put arbitrary times in your growth plan. There's nothing probably more annoying to me as when somebody says, well, you can't get to this position until you've been doing this for 1 year, or you can't get to this until you've been doing this 2 years. There's some arbitrary time frame. Now, the reason that annoys me personally is, I can do a task 100 times a day, or I can do it 5 times a day. If I do it 100 times a day, I'm going to have significantly more experience very quickly than the person who's done it 5 times a day for the last 2 years, right? I'm going to eventually catch up. Now, I'm not saying these discussions don't need to be had and open and upfront on the table, but I wouldn't recommend, when you're building these growth plans, to come up with arbitrary times that don't matter. Because what we're really talking about is, we're not talking about timeline. We're talking about personal growth and development, which, as you heard from our last podcast, is moving at a rate of speed significantly faster than any generation before, and will only continue to gain momentum.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's very unfair to put a timeline on something. Like you said, we're saying, oh well, you can become this if you put in this amount of time. There is too much built into a person's their demeanor, their personality, their drive. No two people are the same. It may take person A to work whatever time frame you think it's going to take them to get there. But then again, you got person B who's already done it. They're at home doing, watching YouTube videos, they're listening to podcasts, they're, listening to audiobooks, and they are certainly going to surpass person A. And they don't need those timelines.
Yeah, definitely. So, think about what amount of work needs to be done as opposed to the timeline, and really set out that growth plan based on that timeline. So, any other items you want to share about the growth plan?
No.
All right. So, We hope that this has been helpful in having you understand a little bit about the growth plan and how we see that these are going to be pretty much a requirement in the workforce moving forward and are a big impact in retaining employees and retaining employees in the millennial and Gen Z generations. So we look forward to seeing you on the next podcast. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Epic Company Culture Podcast with Josh Sweeney. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. For additional content and transcripts, visit epicculture.co. If you have questions or topics you would like us to address or expand on, tweet us at epicculture1 or email at podcast@epicculture.co.